be here. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to ask you a question. Who's ready to tell Michael Bennett that 2 terms is 2 terms too many? I think it's time to let him know that. And I want to tell you something. On my very first day on the campaign trail, I met this woman. I think it was at one of the tiny little mountain towns, about this big. And she came up to me. She goes, you know, red hair is God's warning sign. And I said, you know what? It is for Michael Bennett and the Democrats. Here we're coming. So. Well, I want to take a moment just to let you know a little bit about myself, because that really has informed why I'm standing here today. I grew up on Lowry Air Force Base, right in Aurora, the daughter of a lieutenant colonel. And I want to tell you a funny story. So we have 2 teenagers. One's about to be 17 this week. The other one's 18. They just got their driver's license. So if you're a praying person, remember my husband and I pray for us, because two teenagers with driver's license. But when I got my driver's license, I was on Lowry Air Force Base. My dad was an officer. So I got back from getting my license. I was very proud of myself. And on the car was an officer sticker. So I drive on. Those poor airmen at the gate had to salute me. I thought, this is America. You get saluted when you get your driver's license. And the only reason why I share that is I grew up like many people thinking that freedom was like oxygen. It would always be there. I took it for granted. Then you fast forward a little bit. I went to school in Cherry Creek District. I went to Overland High School. And then I was Miss Colorado. Now, I only share this for 2 reasons. It's a little trivial other than this. As Miss Colorado, I got to see every corner of this great state. I love Colorado. I'm so grateful you're still here. Some people are leaving. I'm staying to fight for this state. We are blessed to be here, and I will do everything within my power to make sure that we get the freedom back that we deserve. But as second runner-up to Miss America, I found myself in the Soviet Union during the coup. Now, I got to tell you, when you go from the lap of liberty on Lowry Air Force Base, and then you walk into a situation where you see the palpable absence of freedom, it was in that moment that I resolved that I would also fight for individual liberty when and if that day came. Well, today is that day, and that's why I'm running for the U.S. Senate. You see, my dad was willing to fight for it in Vietnam. My husband's an 82nd Airborne veteran. But what I'm seeing now reminds me what I saw in the Soviet Union. You see, picture this. I just came from Colorado, second runner-up in my early 20s. And everywhere I looked in the Soviet Union, it was gray, it was dark. People were afraid to look up, afraid to speak up. They were afraid of their children who were being indoctrinated against them with radical agendas by the state. Unfortunately, sounding a little bit too much like what is going on right now in our schools. And when I saw that, I thought, you know what, I will never whisper. Well, then I did come back. I had temporary insanity, and I went to Hollywood. Yes, I'm a recovered actress in my left brain and my right mind. But what I realized was that in Hollywood, this socialism, this big government, blanket that was just bearing down on people had already taken root. While I was there, I quickly moved from acting. My husband, I met him. He was a producer at Walt Disney Studios. We have a production company. I'm a small business owner. The reason why we did stay in that industry is because I believe in the power of story. One of the things that we as conservatives don't do very well is we don't communicate very well. We don't tell stories. We don't grab the hearts. We just bring up our pie charts. If we actually learn how to harness the media, there'd be a big difference. But when I was there, there's a gentleman named Gary Sinise. Many of you may know him. He was Lieutenant Dan in Fort Scott. Now, I shared this story because he found my husband and I, because my husband's being 82nd Airborne and in the halls of Disney. He was never hiding. He was never in the closet in that way, in any way, shape, or form. So Gary was trying to get together conservatives in Los Angeles. So he invited us to this lunch, and I walked through the door, and it was like the first Sons and Daughters of Liberty. And standing in this room was Andrew Breitbart, standing next to Pat Boone, standing next to Mark Cherry, the log cabin Republican behind Desperate Housewives, standing next to John Voight, Gary, my husband, and myself. Now, why I share this is because that's a picture of what America should be. It absolutely should be. When you look at that room, you got Andrew Breitbart standing next to Pat Boone, standing next to Mark Cherry. The one thing they all had in common, and the reason why they were there as conservatives, is because they believed and knew this. The job of the U.S. government is one thing and one thing only: to protect the individual liberties of its citizens and nothing more. And when we find ourselves in a situation where the government has gotten so far outside those boundaries and it believes its job is to dictate every area of our lives, can we open our businesses? Can we decide whether or not we have something injected into our bodies? Can we make our own private healthcare decisions? Can we decide whether or not we want to worship or not worship? Can we decide any of these things in our lives or what we teach our children. I am committed as your next senator to going to Washington, D.C. and letting the government know, once again, that is its only job, and push back against the vast overreach of government into every single area of our lives, because that's all it is supposed to be doing. So I was there. I saw this group start with 10 people in that room. I want to tell you something. This is encouraging. Gary, first of all, asked me to be the first executive director of the group. And I said, Gary, thanks a lot. It is a secret group, so I can never tell anybody what I did. And I had to tell everybody I was just like Barack Obama. I was a community organizer. But we grew that group from 10 people to over 3,000. If we can do that in the heart of Hollywood, I am telling you, Colorado is going to be a piece of cake, because everyone around us is waking up and realizing that we have stepped through the looking glass. And when you have Michael Bennet, a career politician who votes 100% of the time with Joe Biden, 96% of the time with Bernie Sanders, he is out of touch with every single one of us in this room. So I came back home again. Yes, he is. I came back home again. My husband and I were so grateful to bring our kids back to Colorado, make sure it does not become California, because I've seen what that looks like. All of my family is here. And when I did, I started a radio show. I've been doing radio on and off for 10 years on 710 KNUS. I was the director of public policy for that station because I wanted to jump in right away. And in that position, I began to get engaged. We stopped heroin injection sites down next to the Capitol building. And then something happened that really put me into overdrive. And that was when many parents, and I stood with many around the state, went to the Capitol building to testify against comprehensive sex ed. Hundreds of us showed up, waited hours until midnight practically, led rallies. And when they shoved it through on the last day of the legislature, regardless, I thought to myself, this is not representational government. I started an organization called Parents United America, which advocated for parents across the state to be the ultimate authority in their children's lives. You fast forward, it was COVID that woke everybody up. And last summer in June, I was one of those parents that just got my dander up. I testified at our Douglas County School Board meeting, and we helped flip our school board. It went viral, and I ended up on the national meeting. Now, I was only one of those folks. But Holly Warren, who's sitting here, who is my field director, was a campaign manager for the Kids First Slate in Douglas County, and we flipped that school board. But what I'm seeing around our state is people are becoming aware of this vast overreach. And since that time, when I began to see it, the other thing that helped, that really convinced me to step in the race, was last summer when Afghanistan happened. You see, growing up in the Air Force, my father was buried at Fort Logan Cemetery last year with honors. And as much as I miss him, when that happened, I was grateful he was not alive to see that debacle. Because the fact that we left hundreds of Americans behind and he had survived Vietnam to see the same kind of images was inexplicable. I want to give you an example of how out of touch Michael Bennet is. He's on the intelligence committee. So first of all, I want to take his position because we need to find out why the DOJ, the FBI have been sicked upon citizens where Joe Biden basically calls parents domestic terrorists and the Taliban partners. That is upside down. But after that happened in Afghanistan, Michael Bennet praised Joe Biden. And then, you know what his video was of next week? It was of him being rowed down the Colorado River. He didn't row himself because he was wearing a starched shirt and everybody else was doing the work. And he was talking about global warming. He does not understand what we know here. The number one issues facing our country today, first of all, are that the Democratic Party has become the very threat that the Constitution was written to prevent. You see, I love our country. 10 years of radio, what I do, I held everything up to, is it constitutional or not? Does it line up with the Federalist Papers? Look at what they're trying to do. They're trying to break down the division of powers, which is one of the best systems of government that we've inherited. Whether they are trying to federalize election laws, whether they're trying to end the filibuster, decriminalize crime, force unconstitutional mandates, or indoctrinate our children with our tax dollars. I am unafraid to go and stand up to what is happening in Washington, D.C. And I will do that for all of us. I want to share one last story with you why I am so sure that this is our year. Because really, you know, all we need to turn this around is one thing, and it's courage. I want to tell you about something that happened last summer, actually the summer of 2020. We were downtown, my husband and I, for the 6th annual Support the Police rally. And it usually is a very festive atmosphere. You know, obviously the defund the police movement had begun. But we were sitting there were parents, grandparents, children, there were food trucks, there were balloons, 150 of us. I'm talking to Steve Breen, who many of you know is the sheriff up in Will County. And he had just handed me a thin blue line flag, because I've always stood up for our fine men and women that keep us safe. When you hear the statistics that Heidi shared, there's a reason why crime is skyrocketing. So all of a sudden, right after we said the Pledge of Allegiance, all hell literally breaks loose. It is deafening. And we are descended upon by 450 Antifa. And I'm not kidding you, my first response was the same one when I had when I went to the Soviet Union, was ready to face down the tanks. I grabbed that flag that Steve Reeves had just given me, and I went like this. I said, "You're not getting past us." My husband, you all in DC, but my husband, of course, who was, you know, 6'2" on the outside, I'm 6'2" on the inside, he goes, "A little crazy, get behind me." But, you know, I'm like, standing like this. We started backing up and backing up and backing up, and people are literally getting hit over the head and bleeding around us. But here's what I want to tell you. Even though my life has been in media, that was the first Facebook Live I ever did, because I thought to myself, people need to see the faces of the people around us. So I was doing this as they're pushing us. Somebody's grabbing the flag from my hand, I'm grabbing it back. It had almost 1 million views. But what I saw on their faces, we don't need to be afraid of. You see, what I saw was victimization, outrage. People had no idea why they were doing what they were doing. I want to end with this quote. Ronald Reagan said, "There is no weapon or weapons in the arsenals of the world so powerful as the will and moral courage of a free men and women." You know what I did see that day? Moral courage. That's what we have in this room. That's what I'm seeing all over the state from people like you. And when we stand together with that, and I promise you that's what I'm going to take to DC, we will turn this thing around. They're really just bullies. And they're trying to see if we will back down again and continue to give them the power. We're not going to, not on my watch. The last thing I want to let you know is there's really one reason why I'm running. And I mentioned it at the very beginning. They're my kids who are 17 and 18 years old. Because what I cannot do is look them in the face and tell them that I did not do everything within my ability to stop what is going on so that they can inherit the blessings of liberty that we all grew up with. And I know together we can do that. So I very much appreciate your time. I asked you to go to deborahflora.com. Please be a delegate. I'm going through the assembly route to say I very much value and appreciate the grassroots. So we've got materials back there, and I don't know if we have time for any questions. If we do,
I think at the end.
Okay, at the end, I'll be here for questions. Thank you all so much. I so appreciate being here, and I appreciate that we can stand together to protect one another's freedoms. Thank you so much.